Hi guys, Tab here, hope you're all keeping well. In this video I want to have a discussion around a specific topic, and that is the topic of ICE versus EV. So for those of you that don't know what ICE or EVs are, and I'm sure most of you do if you're watching or you've seen any car videos before, of course talking about the internal combustion engine and the electric vehicle. I don't know why we're comparing an engine to a whole vehicle. It should be EM, electric motor. So internal combustion engine versus EMs, motors, vehicles, electric vehicles. And the discussion is going to focus on one area that I think is often overlooked, and that is the driving experience, right? Everyone these days they always say, oh, it's not a driver's car, mate. It's just not an EV. It's not a driver's car. It's not a driver's car. You've had that so many times, right? A driver's car. I mean, all cars, to be frank, are driver's cars. Just they go about that driving bit in a slightly different way. And I also think it's a bit harsh to compare an ICE car to an EV car because, yeah, they're both cars, but they go about doing their thing in very different ways. But I want to have a little look at the driving experience, discuss around that topic specifically. And of course, you can't really do an EV. You can't mention an EV without talking about the environment in one way, shape, or form. So we'll touch on that very briefly and very lightly towards the end because it's kind of been done to death, hasn't it? Let's be frank. So really focusing on the driving experience here. So I want to do this in a kind of bake-off type format. There's going to be 5 areas that I choose, 5 topics, and we'll find out which one I think wins out in each of those categories. And it is my own opinion. You're quite entitled to your own, as is part of being a person, I guess, and formulating your own opinions and conclusions on things. This is my experience. As you know, I'm going from an ICE to an EV at some point very soon. And I'm looking at the sort of higher end, that driver's car crazy experience, right? Looking at it from the higher end side of things. So I want to really thrash out why I think an ICE might be better than an EV or an EV might be better than an ICE in each specific category. So the first of those categories, number 1, is the driving feel. Okay, now I've been a little bit spoiled because I've been driving about in a McLaren 570S. And to be quite frank, the driving feel of that is pretty awesome. I got out in a 720S the other day, took that for a test drive, and honestly, getting back into the 570S after that, it felt like I was getting into a Ford Focus, if that is indeed possible. Yeah, the 720S was that good. And that is, I reckon, pretty much the pinnacle of ICE. Okay, yes, there's crazy multi-million-dollar hypercars out there as well, but pretty much, it doesn't get much better or much faster than that from an ICE car perspective. 710 brake, 500 plus pound-foot of torque. It's just bonkers. The development cycles that have gone into this mean there is no better driving feel. The feedback of the steering, the responsiveness of the car at turning, it's just simply fantastic. Now let's look at the average ICE car. ICE cars are very, very heavy indeed. The Taycan I've been looking at is 2.2, 2.3 tons. But the battery packs for those are very low down. So you've got that very low center of gravity and also good weight distribution as well that you get with having that flat battery pack in the middle. I think the battery pack weighs about 650 kilos. So ICE cars are very different in terms of the way they deliver that driving experience. And the Taycan, the Turbo S, is so torquey, it kind of makes you feel a bit queasy. It's just so thrusty and instantaneous. It's kind of not something you're used to if you're used to an ICE car where you've got to get out the rev range, you've got to let the turbo spool up, whatever it is, but it's really progressive. An ICE car is just brutal in terms of its instant on-off drivability. The steering on ICE cars, on EVs, I should say, specifically, we've had a conversation about ICE, but EVs, that steering isn't as responsive as a lightweight ICE car. It's never going to be. But I think the Taycan that I drove has done a pretty darn good job of getting there. But, driving feel, we got to be frank, this one absolutely goes to ICE for now. But don't forget, we're just at the start of EVs and a lot can change. So category number 2, usability on the roads. Now, the UK roads at the moment are quite frankly shocking, and to get down some of them, a tank would be better suited than any form of car. But that said, we do most of our driving on the roads, even if we track our cars. We spend a lot of time in them on the roads as well. And there's some areas where an ICE car falls down a little bit, right? Just in terms of usability on the roads. And a good example of that is an ICE car, either be a manual or a flappy paddle. Now, I've definitely been caught out before, and if you haven't, well, I think you're fibbing a little bit in, for example, pulling out of a junction or a roundabout when you might have missed a gear, or your flappy paddle is doing something that you're not expecting it to do, and you end up rolling out into a gap far slower than you should be and end up annoying the driver who's had to slow down for you and giving them the old apology or whatever it is. But you do not get that problem in an EV. If you do get that problem in an EV, it's broken or you need to plug it in. So EVs definitely kind of win for me from the usability perspective on the road. Also, ICE cars as well, you've got to kind of, performance cars, you've got to really open them up, get up that rev band before they really come alive in most cases. The other thing about EV is they tend to be greater in mass, so the damping tends to be a little bit greater too. So they really soak up those bumps, I think, a lot better. They're also far better if you're stuck in traffic, and for long journeys, just really relaxing as well. Whereas if you're in a crazy, highly strung, what are they called? Those male horses, Mustang things, stallions. That's it, a stallion of a car. Then, they're just kind of raring to go. But EV is just beautiful and chill in that respect. So this one, controversially, is going to go to EVs. Category number 3, and that is usability on the track. Now, this one is probably going to be pretty quick because let's be frank, ICE is where it's at here. If you want to track your car, you're going to be booked in for a session. You want to maximize that session. You want to be in an ICE car. Take it for some good laps, drain that fuel down, go and top it up, come straight back, on you go. And I think they're just slightly better in that respect, less mass to lug around the track. If you look at an EV, for sure, people do track these. I've seen it on the Nürburgring and going around the track. You're going to run out of juice pretty quickly because you're at full throttle. You're going to be really draining that battery, really putting stress on that motor. And you need to leave some juice left to get to a charger. And then you've got to wait for ages to charge it, which is probably going to allow your session at the track to time out. A lot of tracks I've seen don't have EV charging capability. I think we'll start to see that change as the trend changes and we have a shift towards EV. But yeah, let's be frank. You're on a track, you need an ICE car. This one goes straight to ICE. Next up, category number 4, and that is the convenience. Now, let's not forget, if you buy a new ICE car, you've got to run it in for 1,000 miles, right? So you've got to drive it about like a respectable old lady. It's not to say old ladies are boring in the way they drive. They're just more measured, controlled, and far more sensible than hooligans that like to fly around in ridiculous cars. But that is, for me, a negative, right? To have to run it in for 1,000 miles. It's really boring. I've done it before many a time. It's quite boring. If it's a cold day, you've got to let it get up to temperature before the cabin is warm. And you've also got to let it get up to temperature before you open it up a little bit. A lot of cars, as you know, will have rev restrictors that won't allow you to rev it beyond a certain amount until it's warmed up, especially performance cars. So that is a bit of a frustration as well. With an EV, you don't have that problem. You just get in and go, and it'll either have a heater matrix, a heating element, or a heat pump, so it gets up to temperature very quickly. And a lot of them are connected, right? So you can warm them up remotely. I think that is a real bonus. The servicing interval of EVs is insane. 2 years for a Porsche Taycan. Also, the brake pads, because it uses regen to brake with most of the time, unless you're braking really hard, it's got a timed service interval. A timed service interval for the brake pads, which I think is 6 years, which is crazy. Also, EVs tend to have bucket loads of storage because there's no engine in the way. Bonus, right? This one's going to EV. Next up, category number 5, and that is sound. And yes, this is going to be a tough one for EVs to compete in because if you like your cars, if you're a bit of a petrol head like me, you're going to love the sound of a V8, a V10, a V12. bringing itself into life. Absolutely amazing sound. Or if it's turbocharged, that turbo spooling up, screaming down the road like a banshee. There is nothing quite like it. It makes the hairs on your back of your neck stand up. Now, I think my favourite sound of all time is probably that of a Lancaster bomber. It uses the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. That is very special indeed, and I just think, it's going to be pretty hard to beat that. Now, that said, I do like the way that manufacturers of EVs have gone out their way to make them sound a little bit more interesting. I do like the sound of the Audi e-tron RS. Very cool, right? It's not trying to be an engine. It's more spaceshipy. It's trying to be what it is, an EV, right? If you look at the Porsche Taycan, that's also got 2 speakers in it that generate sound. I think it generates sound, the internal speakers, and it's got 2 external speakers. So some of the ways that they have made these cars sound is pretty darn cool. And I like it, just accepting that it's an EV and sounding like something futuristic and nice. But, yeah, instant win for ICE. Last up, category number 6, bonus category. We've got to touch on this, and that is, of course, environmental. Now, you could do a whole 20 series video on this, and believe me, there's lots of useful information out there already. But from an environmental perspective, let's be frank, it's not good to burn fossil fuels. Now, I know there's collateral damage with the harvesting of lithium and cobalt required for EVs and batteries. But, I think we'll see technology improve in that area. We will. I'm positive we'll get there, right? But let's be frank, it's not good to burn fossil fuels. That's why we're all converting our gas boilers to ground source heat pumps going forward, right? So if we can avoid polluting the atmosphere, pumping CO2 into the atmosphere, and risking that runaway greenhouse effect you see on the likes of Venus and Mars, we have to do something, right? And I think EVs are 100% a step in the right direction here, right? So I don't want to cook this topic, but for me, we've got to be frank, right? This one goes to EVs. Anyway, that's it. Just a little bit of a run through on my thoughts. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and see you in the next one. Bye for now.